And so my focus this morning, if you've not noticed yet, is the Centurion. And it's the Centurion that is in charge of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know what your family history is like or what your experience of the army might be. I personally have had very little experience of the army. My dad did 2 years conscription back a day. Apparently, he was in the same time there when Michael Heseltine, if you remember him, was there. He even got Officer of the Year over him. But I had a couple of uncles, a few uncles that worked with the Lancashire Fusiliers, posted to Burma, posted to Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and all the heartache of that. But soldiers are people who are committed to putting their mission before their comfort. They're committed to their fellow soldiers before themselves, and they are people who are obedient to duty rather than their personal opinions on what they think of the orders that are given. It's a lifestyle rooted in discipline, in authority structures, and teamwork. So what about military life for a first century Roman centurion? And the office of centurion was the highest rank that an ordinary soldier could get to. So it was hard graft to get there, but they were paid well. But they commanded the respect of others. It was the most critical role that was there in the military kind of chain of operation because they delivered all the military strategy and the success depended on them. So they were always promoted on their merit. And their tasks were twofold. They had a in-combat task, which was obviously to the responsibility of implementing the mission strategy, the military strategy. They would always be leading from the front. They would take the charge into battle. They were tough guys. Out of combat, then they administered all of the discipline in the ranks. They mediated the conflicts between the men. They provided security and protection for communities when they were called on. And they supervised all the police actions in the areas where they were occupied, where the Romans occupied a particular region. But more importantly, or importantly today, they oversaw the executions. And if there was a Roman that was being executed, that was usually by the sword. If it was a non-Roman, then it was very often by crucifixion. So they were never off duty. It was a life of a career soldier with the brutality of that hand-to-hand conflict of kind of first century warfare, very harsh conditions, and they were absolute survivors within it. And as you read the New Testament, there are 6 centurions that are mentioned, and several of them had significant roles in the stories and in the eyewitness accounts. And it just shows the degree to which Jesus and his message had influenced both across cultures, across socio-economic, political landscape, and the whole of the Roman army as well. One commentator said this: on one hand, they were heading up troops, the centurions, in an occupation force, professional soldiers representing the iron fist of Rome, representing everything the first century Jews hated. And yet, in spite of that, when they are written about in the New Testament, they are spoken of well and they are respected. It's almost counterintuitive. But what it does is it reflects their character as men. They were remarkable in their daring. They were remarkable in their courage. They were steady people. They were reliable. And they became almost pillars of society, if you like, even in the occupation that they had. And they were very often generous with their finances as they sought to keep the peace of Rome in the communities that they find themselves in. So we come to the centurion at the cross of Jesus and the credibility of his words. This is not a raw recruit. This is not some easily manipulated conscript. But this is a reasoned observation by a seasoned veteran. A man who had watched men die, who'd actually put many people to death all the way through his adult life. This was a man that the army could count on. And so it makes the faith of this centurion all the more extraordinary when he makes this declaration that is recorded in Matthew 27, verse 54. It says, "Now the centurion and those who were with him, keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, 'Surely this was the Son of God.'" A couple of things to consider which just help us appreciate the magnitude of the words that he makes. Firstly, there's the evidence against his declaration, because Jesus has been tried. Okay, a charge has come against Jesus, a blasphemy charge, claiming to be God himself, the Son of God. And so according to the Jews, that is the claim. And his commander-in-chief, Pontius Pilate, has upheld the conviction. Yet he wanted to get rid of someone else, but ended up being Barabbas. But he upholds that decision. And so the chain of command comes down. And yet this centurion, at this point, his declaration rejects that accusation. It rejects that charge. And it now affirms Jesus' claim. Why? Because he sees something. He sees a number of things in Jesus' claim that hold true for him. So what is that evidence? Okay, even though he has supervised many crucifixions and taken charge of them, he sees something remarkable on this particular occasion. Okay, this one has impacted him like no other. And there's a number of threads that help us see that. Firstly, he sees the amazing response of Jesus to the injustice that's been forced upon him from his own people. Okay, he sees how he responds to that injustice, and that has a remarkable impact on him. He also sees the response of Jesus to the torture that him and his soldiers have just inflicted upon him. You know, it started with a whipping, the leather whip with bits of bone and metal in it. 39 times, we're told, he's lashed, literally stripping the flesh off his back and sides. He's stripped. He's put a scarlet robe on him. They thrust a crown of thorns and push it deep into his head. They mock him. They beat him about the head. They spit on him. They force him to carry his crossbar the best part of half a mile. And then they crucify him with nails through his wrists and through his feet, between the tibia and the Achilles. Absolutely tortured. And yet he sees in Jesus the way he responds with dignity to this lynch mob who just are buying for his blood. Even, as I say, releasing Barabbas in his stead. But as a sheep is silent before his slaughter, so is Jesus. Incredible dignity that this guy sees in him. Secondly, he sees Jesus' mercy towards the people that have rejected him, and also the centurion and the soldiers that have just inflicted the crucifixion upon him. And his response is what? It is, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Even as they're sitting gambling for his clothes, Father, forgive them. As people are watching this gruesome spectacle as entertainment, Father, forgive them. Jesus' concern is for their forgiveness, not his own escape. And that has a powerful impact on the centurion. As I say, a guy who's looked men in the eyes, looked dying men in the eyes. But for some reason, this is different. And then there's the dramatic response of the earth and the heavens. The soldiers and himself, the earth quakes. We saw the earth quake and the things that were happening. The sun goes dark. They felt the power of the earth quaking under their feet. And they saw these phenomena suddenly end as Jesus yields and commits his spirit to his Father and dies. And so the centurion is impacted by these significant events that accompany the death of Jesus. He's just never seen a day like this. He saw it all. He heard it all. He felt it all. And as a result, it says his troops became frightened. A centurion and a battle-hardened army became frightened. They've learned how to cope with fear, but this was something else. Imagine suddenly realizing that you have just put nails through the person who is actually God himself, the Son of God. This was no ordinary execution. And so the centurion's declaration doesn't come out of some mystical, angelic appearance. It comes solely from the effects of the power that he sees at work, both in Jesus, in his response, and in the events around them that happened that day. And there is life-changing power in what Jesus did on the cross. Okay, by dying for our sin in our place. You know, as Isaiah prophesied, he was disfigured beyond that of any human being. No wonder the sun goes dark, almost as though the Father doesn't want people to see the horror of what happens when he takes sin into his body. How can he do that? All of the hurt that sin causes in our world, he takes that in his body. All of its ugliness, all of the pain that is in the world, he takes it in his body. All of the isolation that comes from sinful humanity, all of the shame in the world, he takes it in his body. The righteous one for the unrighteous one. That he might bring us to God as we yield to him and trust him with our lives. And that life-changing power began to work from the instant of his death. And it started in the life of the centurion. It changed his perspective of who this man was. It changed his perspective on who Jesus Christ was. And it changed his life. And that has continued for some 2,000 years. Because the message seems foolishness, as Paul writes, foolishness to the world. But to those who are being saved, it is the power and the wisdom of God. Charles Wesley put it like this in his great hymn. He said, "Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me?" It has power to change our lives, whoever you are. Even the hardened, battle-weary heart of a career soldier, it brings life out of death. It brings forgiveness. Here's what a friend of mine wrote a few years ago. He was a soldier himself. And he said 3 words summed me up: angry, aggressive, and agnostic. At school, he said, I was forever in trouble. I thought I knew everything. I was big enough and ugly enough to look after myself. At 18, I joined the parachute regiment and quickly found out that the tougher you were, the better you were. As training consisted of 3 things: aggression, aggression, and aggression. That suited me. I had a temper and a fearless attitude to match. In 1982, I got married, and on that day, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. I was part of the task force and was to spearhead the recapturing of the islands. I couldn't wait. But it was during that war that I prayed for the first time. We got into a very difficult situation, and I thought we were all dying. We were all going to die. And I remember putting my hands together and saying sorry to God for all the wrong things I'd done through my life. And I asked him to get me out of this mess and home to my wife. He did. Unfortunately, I quickly forgot my prayers and my promises to change, and I fell back into my old ways. Fast forward through some difficult times and a lot of questions. I knew someone who went to church, who answered some of my questions and persuaded me to attend an Alpha course. Afterwards, I realized my life had been turned upside down, but I still had questions. So I attended a second time. My local pub friends joked that I'd become an alcoholic. But I came to the point of asking Jesus to forgive all my sins, for God to fill me with his Holy Spirit. And I thanked God for sending his only Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross so that I could be forgiven. So whoever you are today, whatever our background today, whatever our standing, we're all on the level, because we're all on the level at the foot of the cross. We've all fallen short, but we can embrace Jesus who died for us. So will you allow him today to change your perspective on who he is, on who Jesus really is? And will you allow him to change your life with his power